Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those Anti-federalists, they absolutely got it right. And this is Tom Navolis, your host, and I'm so delighted to be here with you today. And so much to catch up on. So much. I just don't know any way that I'm going to be able to get any of it done, let alone the few things that I'd like to get done. Today, though, in particular, we are going to bring us into those mirrors of history and really consider what has been going on this past week. Just to catch up a little bit more, is that we are taking in, kind of splitting the program up a little bit for what we're doing with Dr. Mike Spalding and his program and what he has on his FM station, so that the first and third segments will be combined, and for him to rebroadcast. And then obviously all three of our segments are at Liberty Works Radio Network, as well as where? Yes, SamuelAdamsReturns.net, where you can get the whole thing. You get the video, you get it all. So when we are looking at those mirrors in history, we have to clearly understand that also Ecclesiastes 1:9 is absolutely true. And that being what? There's nothing new under the sun. So what's really got me cranking this week? Well, we can delve into the insanities, the continued evil. They're not insanities. They do it over and over and over again, expecting a different result, but the result is well planned. And the plan, the cabal, as the Anti-federalists said, and even the Federalists commented on the cabal, which is a worked out plan, and what we call today a conspiracy theory, isn't in fact what our founders would define as cabal. Very interesting. So to get us in the framework a little bit, I wanted to take and just kind of ratchet back for a moment on none other than what we were doing, and we kind of skipped away from a little bit last week, is that what George Washington's farewell address relative to what's been happening in the Trump administration. And this was just a wow for me as I continued reading and preparing for today, is that he was talking about what's happening on international front. And one of the things that he says with that is, so likewise a passionate attachment of one nation to another produces a variety of evils. Sympathy for the favorite nation, facilitating the illusion of an imaginary common interest in cases where no real common interest exists, and infusing into one the enmities of the other, betrays the former into a participation in the quarrels and wars of the latter without adequate inducement or justification. It leads also to concessions to the favorite nation of privileges denied to the other, which is apt, doubtly, to injure the nation making the concessions, and unnecessarily parting with what ought to have been retained, and the exciting jealousy, ill will, and disposition to retaliate in the parties from whom equal privileges are withheld. And it gives to ambitious, corrupted, and deluded citizens, get that? What we just talked about, what do we see out there, in particular with the Democrats? And the whole Democrat movement, the socialist movement that's going on right now. We see exceedingly jealousy, ill will, a disposition to retaliate. We see with that ambitious, corrupted, and deluded citizens who devote themselves to the favorite nation, facility to betray or sacrifice the interest of their own country without odium, sometimes even with popularity, gilding with the appearance of a virtuous sense of obligation, and commendable defense for public opinion, or a laudable zeal for public good, the base or foolish compliances of ambition, corruption, or infatuation. All of that you can take to the bank as who the Democrats, the socialists, are all about. When we think about the cabals of the internationalists, you can look at, even if we take and just focus for a moment on the Clintons and all of their insanity and the monies and just the various aspects of their evil, selling out the nation for profit. You just work through all of that. And then you have all the socialist professors at the universities, which I think we already talked about the fact that I love that the president is going to cut the funding for universities that do not allow conservatives to have a voice. I think that is, if it was me, I'd cut the federal funding. I'd cut the state funding to all these universities because they're nothing but, putrid cesspools of evil that are taking and indoctrinating. Not like what I've talked about in the past when the flag isn't hiding that JD degree. No, the flag is there because we're not going to ever get that degree, because I can't find a university where I would be willing to invest my money to listen to professors that would degrade our nation and our constitutional system. Anyway, that's what we have out there. But when we take and we look at how do you do a trade deal? How do you take and you consider America first in all of the endeavors for negotiating? How do you look at fundamental principles upon which that you can define the truths that are going to what? Pay attention to what Washington was saying as the way to keep and preserve the republic, as to implement the Constitution within the context of, at that time, a set experiment. Well, that's very interesting. One of the things that I wanted to ratchet back with, and I don't have it in front of me at the moment, but I will pull it up for the third segment, but I just wanted to give you a little flavor for what I'm talking about, both on the universities being anti-American student-wise, anti-constitution, anti-religious freedom, as well as the insanities of the law schools. So if you go this past week, and as you see in the references to the Federalists, the site that's called the Federalists, there is their student who will be graduating this spring in May that with his JD at Yale University. And the article that he writes in there is how he has been, what do you want to call it, prejudiced against, how he has been told basically to shut up, how he has been slammed for his religious beliefs, as well as standing up for foundational constitutionalism. Ladies and gentlemen, Yale Law School. Let's see, that's the Bush family. Interesting. That's a whole lot of others. My commentary to everyone on this is that you can go back and reference to Dr. Daggett, as well as others that I talk about, and you could click on that link at samueladamsreturns.net, the Chaplains and Clergy of the Revolution, and read about those early presidents of Yale, going to war, standing biblically strong, fighting to preserve the liberty and freedoms of whom? Not only those in their community, but for the general idea of a new republic, of a new state. You have to understand that every state was what? It's independent republic. Independent republic. It only came together in a union for common purposes, limited in scope, or supposed to have been within the context of the Constitution. So, very, very interesting. So I'm commenting, and I have commented to that student, that go read Chaplains and Clergy of the Revolution and see, in particular, those who were presidents of Yale that were first men of God and preached the Word of God in Yale and expected students to understand the fundamental biblical principles of governance and law. That's part of the whole problem that we have today. Is there's a pastor here in Northeast Ohio that's going, and I think I mentioned it before, he's going to try and talk about theonomy. I refuse to listen to him because he's not qualified, because he doesn't live it, he doesn't practice it. So there's no way that he can talk about it. And to that extent, when we look at our foundation, there was theonomy. It was because when you understand the fundamentals of self-governance within the context of biblical truth, the basics of the 10 commandments for self-governance, that's the simple definition of theonomy. I brought that up before. You want a better discussion on that? Go watch Doug Wilson and how he talks about his definition of theonomy and what that means. But the point is that God is universally supreme. So we already have that framework. And it is the duty of higher learning institutions to help people understand that framework and to understand that there are all of these other perversions out there, if you want to call them that. Some people call them the solid forms of how civil society should work. Really? I don't think so. I don't think you can have a civil society without morality and virtue. I think that's what Madison and John Adams and even Sam Adams and a number of others have said, is that if you're going to have good governance, if you're going to have a rule of law, you have to have a moral and virtuous people. And that really comes out, and I'm really plugging, because we're going to talk about it in the last segment a little bit more, out of the Chaplains and Clergy. I was just awestruck as I was putting together and preparing and pre-reading chapters 30 through 33, which will be coming up and up online this next coming week. But it's just critical as I sum up this first segment. I'm already thinking through the last segment, talk about multitasking in your brain. Just to kind of sum it up, is that the avenues of foreign influence in innumerable ways, such attachments are particularly alarming to truly enlightened and independent patriots. How many opportunities do they afford to tamper with domestic factions, to practice the arts of seduction, to mislead public opinion, to influence or awe the public councils? Such an attachment of a small or weak towards a great and powerful nation dooms the former to be the satellite of the latter. Let's see, we got George Soros out there. You have the UN. You have all of these other influences. Who do you think the UK is? Not the UK in particular, but the EU. What do you think about China holding all of our debt? What do you think about all of the other regimes that are out there that are those foreign influences that do everything that George Washington was talking about to our detriment? And what do? They practice the art of seduction. They tamper with our factions internal, which are the political parties, especially the Democrats with their own collusion. Russia, Democrats. Anyway. And they mislead the public opinion to influence or awe the public councils. Oh my goodness gracious, ladies and gentlemen, these are the warnings of George Washington. And Sam Adams did a lot of warnings as well. And more so did those anti-federalists. So come on back for the second segment. when Sam Adams, yes, he did. He absolutely got it right with those anti-federalists. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this second segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, yes, they did. They absolutely got it right. And this is Tom Navolis, your host. And you know what? As always, please look at what is going on at Liberty Works Radio Network. LWRN.net is the simple way to get there. And I'm telling you, there's been some really good programming this last week, especially the live programming. When you go through that and see what's happening there, especially in that Maryland market, I encourage you, highly encourage you, thanks, Kat, to take and go in there and check it out. And when you check it out, look at all the other hosts and hostesses, and please take and hit that donate button, because it's you. It's you. It's a listener-funded network. It's all about you. So let's take another dive right into those mirrors of history and check out a little bit more of what we heard from George Washington. But I want to take and have you think about what has been said by the Anti-federalists. We're going to try and weave into here the two of them. I don't know that I'm going to be able to do it in time, but one that we'll get through kind of quickly is from the Centinel. And we've talked about the Centinel before, but I don't think we've talked about this one in particular. He's done about 24 different essays, so it's a lot of writing that was put out there, and he contributed into the Philadelphia Independent Gazetter. And this particular one is January 16th, 1788. Okay, if we don't look at what socialism will do, we have to take into effect the fundamentals of anarchy. And this is one of the things that was being brought up by the Federalists in relationship to the arguments of the Anti-federalists, saying, you know, if you don't do this new Constitution, there's going to be anarchy. There's going to be all these things, and there's going to be this, and there's going to be that. You know, trying to set what the Democrats kind of do right now, and even some of the Republicans, is that, oh, you have to take, and we got to, you know, there's all these other things. We got to hurry up and get this done. Well, the only thing we have to hurry up and get done is what we did, is kick the butt of our enemies out of our country. And right now, that is the invasion of illegals that need to be dealt with. But that's kind of going a little far, except that what they bring and what they're doing is anarchical. So here's what our friend the Centinel had to say. The evils of anarchy have been portrayed with all the imaginary language and the growing colors of eloquence. The affrighted mind is thence led to clasp the new Constitution as an instrument of deliverance, as the only avenue to safety and happiness. You know, I probably should substitute in here is that the socialists now, the Bernie Sanders, the Elizabeth Warrens, the Democrat Party in general, are trying to deliver a new instrument into the existing instrument. And remember that the instrument that we had was what? The Articles of Confederation. And this new instrument of Constitution of 87 is coming in, and it's like, but now you got all this socialism. So here you have this new Constitution as an instrument of deliverance, as the only avenue to safety and happiness. So kind of think about this in the terms of bringing socialism with this warning. To avoid the possible and transitory evils of one extreme, you right-wingers out there, it is seduced into the certain and permanent misery necessarily attendant on the other. A state of anarchy, from its very nature, can never be a long continuance. The greater its violence, the shorter its duration. Hello, Venezuela! Order and security are immediately sought by the distracted people beneath the shelter of equal laws and the salutary restraints of regular government, what does it do? And if it's to be not attainable, absolute power is assumed by the one or a few who shall be most enterprising and successful. Bernie Sanders, you know, it hasn't been done right yet. Never will be. All right. If anarchy, therefore, were the inevitable consequence of rejecting the new Constitution, it would be infinitely better to incur it. For even then, there would be at least a chance of good government rising out of licentiousness. It's like, bring it on. If we have to, let's just tear it apart, right? Because socialism is, pretty bad. And when we look at what they're warning of today, is that, we got enough of that right now. We got enough licentiousness and other evils that are occurring within the Republicans and within Congress and even at the state level. But no rush at once into despotism, because there is a bare possibility of anarchy ensuing from the rejection, or from what is yet more visionary, the small delay that would be occasioned by a revision and correction of the proposed system of government is so superlatively weak, so fatally blind, that it is astonishing any person of common understanding should suffer such an imposition to have the least influence on his judgment. Still more astonishing that so flimsy and deceptive a doctrine should make converts among the enlightened freemen of America. Oh, my word. Who have so long enjoyed the blessings of liberty. What is going on? But when I view among such converts men otherwise preeminent, it raises a blush for the weakness of humanity, that these, her brightest ornaments, should be so dim-sighted to what is self-evident to most men, that such imbecility of judgment should appear where so much perfection was looked for. This ought to teach us to depend more on our own judgment and the nature of the case than upon the opinions of the greatest and best men, who, from constitutional infirmities or particular situations, may sometimes view an object through a delusive medium. But the opinions of great men are more frequently the dictates of ambition or private interest. That's some of the things that I talked about before, out of Intellectuals and Society. Thomas Sowell talks about that. He talks about how, there's nothing new under the sun. So Thomas Sowell takes and he writes this, what is this book? 600 and some pages with all the notes. Yeah, it's 600 and, 55, 57, 59, 660 pages of the book, and with the notes and footnotes and all of that. And it's the same point, is that people depend on who's supposed to be these intellectuals, these smarter ones, these anointed ones, the chosen ones. And yet, what the Centinel's saying, use your brain. Don't be fooled. Don't be cajoled. Anyway, he goes on to talk about this in Anarchy a little bit more, but the state of affairs and the corruption that comes in with it, and on and on and on he goes. But with that, he kind of sums it all up and says that they should be cautious not to trespass too far on the forbearance of freemen when resting their dearest concerns, but prudently retreat from the gathering storm. And that's what we have. That's what we have going on right now, is a gathering storm. So with that, I wanted to now take us into, and I don't even know what I did with the rest of it. They didn't mark the pages here. Kath is showing me 5 minutes, and so I won't have time. to finish it up. But what we do have is from the Anti-Federalist, who's an obscure Anti-Federalist. We'll get into some of the pieces of it. And his name, his pseudonym is Alfred. Alfred defends the Articles of Confederation, and this is in the New York Journal, the December 25th, 1787, and it's reprinted in the Philadelphia Independent Gazette. It said, to the real patriots of America, that's you out there, real patriots of America, America is now free. She now enjoys a greater portion of political liberty than any other country under heaven. How long she may continue so depends entirely upon her own caution and wisdom. If she would look to herself more and to Europe less, I am persuaded it would tend to promote her felicity, which is happiness. She possesses all the advantages which characterize a rich country. Rich within herself, she ought less to regard the politics, the manufacturers, and the interest of distant nations. You getting that? Forget those distant people. We got it all right here. When I look to our situation, climate, extent, soil, and its productions, rivers, ports, when I find I can at this time purchase grain, bread, meat, other necessities of life at a reasonable a rate as in any country, when I see we are sending great quantities of tobacco, wheat, and flour to England and other parts of the globe beyond the Atlantic, when I get on the other side of the Western Mountains and see the extensive country, which for its multitude of rivers and fertility of soil is equal, if not superior, to any other whatever, when I see these things, I cannot be brought to believe that America's in that deplorable, ruined condition which some designing politicians represent, or that we are in a state of anarchy beyond redemption unless we adopt, without any addition or amendment, the new Constitution of Socialism, I added that, proposed by the late convention. A constitution which, in my humble opinion, contains the seeds and scions of slavery and despotism. That's really socialism. When the volume of American Constitutions by John Adams first made its appearance in Europe, we find some of the most eminent political writers of the present age and the reviewers of literature full of admiration and declaring they had never before seen so much good sense, freedom, and real wisdom in one publication. Ladies and gentlemen, I am running out of time in regards to this. One of the things that I have to wrap up with, because I found the last page, it says, "Let us not, ye lovers of freedom, be rash and hasty. Perhaps the real evils we labor under do not arise from the system. There may be other causes to which our misfortunes may be properly attributed. Read the American Constitution. That means every state, and you will find our essential rights and privileges well guarded and secured. Not our manners be the source of our national evils. May not our attachment to foreign trade increase them? Have we not acted imprudently in exporting almost all of our gold and silver for foreign luxuries? It is now acknowledged that we have not sufficient quantity of the precious metals to answer the various purposes of government and commerce." Okay, I'm down to my last 50 seconds, and I have to stop here. Go and read this about Alfred. It nails where we are today and what has happened under the warning of this Constitution of 87. And what has happened is drawing us into a new form of slavery. Slavery as socialism is now impending in our Congress, in the House of Representatives, even at the state legislatures. Ladies and gentlemen, he talks about what the solution is. It is morality and public virtue. You know what? you got to crank it up at your churches because that's the only place it's going to come from. And you know what? Once again, I prove that Sam Adams, he is returned, and those anti-federalists absolutely got it right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this last segment of Samuel Adams Returns Those Anti-Federalists. They got it right, and this is Tom Navolis, your host. And as a reminder, for all of those that want to catch all three segments and hear all of the programming, you can see the archives of every program at samueladamsreturns.net. So I encourage you to go there and see that. So we were talking about some interesting things in the first segment relative to George Washington's farewell address, and what does it mean with international, what do you want to call it, international cabal, if you will. I think that's the easy way to sum it up. Last segment we talked about the one of the letters from the Centinel, one of the Anti-Federalists, and then Alfred. Wasn't Alfred like that TV program? I don't remember. Was that like, and it wasn't the alien. Alfred nails it. And so go read that resource that's there in the links, both on YouTube and at samueladamsreturns.net for today's program. And I wanted to bring you back to two things, what I mentioned in the first segment. Those two things are, first off, I thought I could be a Christian and constitutionalist at Yale Law School. I was wrong. And so this was by Aaron Haviland, and it is published in the Federalist. So that resource is there, but it's thefederalist.com. It is an amazing article, and just talking about something here, and he quotes right out of the gospel, and this happens to be a Catholic young man, and his faith was strengthened over time, and he reads this, he writes this, but I say to you that listen, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you, if anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other cheek. And so he talks about forgiveness, and he talks about those types of principles that Jesus brings out. But where he talks about it is in an age of political tribalism and social media. The priest at his mass there at Yale, I think it was at Yale, was talking about what is the duty of a Christian to refrain from temptation, to pray for your enemies, and to ultimately attempt to forgive. He was a stereotypical Catholic, but there he went to the Naval Academy and the University of Cambridge, and he served in the Marine Corps. He's a member of the Federalist Society chapter there at Yale, and he got slapped, man. You got to go read the article because he was taken and he was trying to bring a speaker in. A lawyer from Alliance Defending Freedom, ADF, a Christian legal group that's won numerous First Amendment cases at the Supreme Court, and to come in and discuss the Masterpiece Cake Shop versus Colorado Civil Rights Commission case. And then they had a huge outcry. And the first condemnation was from Outlaws, the law school's LGBTQ group, and they attacked the Federalist Society for inviting the ADF to campus, called a boycott for an event, and then over the next 24 hours, almost every student group jumped into the bandwagon to boycott it. Finally, I think it was in here, the school administration basically put the kibosh on it. Wow, with a short notice. So even though the event took place 2 days later, around 30 people attended, the boycotters decorated the front door with rainbow posters, but mostly stuck to protest and support groups in other rooms. And then one of the disruptors came in, ate some leftover pizza, and left with that while flipping the finger, blowing a kiss and flipping the finger on the way out. Go read the article. I mean, there's so much more there, and I don't want to taint what this guy's trying to say. You know, he's got some good job offers, and he made some really good connections going to Yale Law School. Hopefully, he's not part of Skull and Bones. But what struck me about this was that, as I mentioned to you in the first segment, that I'm continuing to read the Chaplains and Clergy of the Revolution. And in doing that, what is very critical in my mind's eye is that Yale, Harvard, Princeton, they were all initially led by godly men. Godly men actually led them at the very beginning, the inception of these schools. They had chapel, they had prayer. Were there times that the schools went awry? Yeah, but it was because the leadership was not godly. That's what happened down at Princeton. And that was one of the reasons that when John Witherspoon came back in, he kind of cleaned up the deck down there. So you think about it. The schools are only going to go in a direction of leadership. So when you have humanists, communists, socialists, and others that don't understand the foundational principles, even at the law schools, yeah, they go into law. What? Law? How to go argue a case in front of a jury, how to do business, how to write contracts. What about liberty? Well, where I want to take you into is not the particulars of, say, President Daggett. You can look him up, as I mentioned in the first segment, but something here from the New England clergy. And I'm not going to give you this particular name or what chapter it is, but here's something I wanted to read to you about the clergy at the Revolution. And here's a quote from a person that is a descendant of this one pastor. But the most powerful element of revolutionary strength in Connecticut was her congregational clergy, and the opinion may be expressed without fear of contradiction that no class or order of men is the country so much indebted for its national independence. That's the clergy. Get it? The clergy is where we're supposed to be indebted for our liberties and freedom. Continuing. Had they preached a slavish and cowardly submission to the royal will, had they declared it to be the first of the duties to honor the king, we should today have been royal colonists of the British crown. Instead of preaching Jesus as king, which that clergy preached, and the independence and liberty that comes from him, if they would have preached what modern Tory traitors teach at the pulpits, wow, why is socialism coming to America? Why has it come to America? Because of the Tories in the pulpits of America. Well, I won't go further with that. Continuing here a little bit more. The immense influence of the clergy for the first century and a half is alike honorable to them and to the people. Most of them who first emigrated into the country were gentlemen of family and station and had good estates, which they freely spent in assisting their poor brethren and parishioners in the numerous difficulties of making new settlements. They possessed a great portion of the literature of the colony and were the instructors of the flower of its youth. The ministers were instructing instead of what we have in education today. Get that? Get that? Instead, today you have humanists, you have communists, you have socialists, you have perversions that are impacting our children today. Continuing, they had given a striking evidence of their integrity and self-denial in emigrating from their pleasant homes into this distant land for the sake of religious liberty. And their people revered them as exiles and fellow sufferers for the dearest of causes. No wonder that all these circumstances combine to give them an uncommon influence over their hearers of every rank and character. No wonder that the governors and magistrates and leading men of the land deemed them worthy of all honor. Not anymore. They were consulted by the legislature in all affairs of consequence, civil and religious, and with civilians were appointed on committees to advise and assist them in the most delicate and important concerns of the Commonwealth. Whereas now, except for the few pastors that I know, and Pastor Mike Spalding and a number of others that he's associated with, and maybe in a few, but you know what? The megachurch guys, the guys that I talked about last week that have churches maybe over that 500 number, majority of Christian churches in America, again, I don't care what size they are, they have run away from these truths. You know something? Again, like George Washington, President Trump calls for the Council of Pastors. You know, I don't know everything that he calls for a council of pastors for, but he calls for a council of pastors. Hey, when was the last time your county commissioner called for a council of pastors? When was the last time that a board, say a mental health board in your community, a board on aging, a board of anything, your state legislators called for a council of pastors? When was the last time your mayor or your governor called for a council of pastors? If there was a calling for a council of pastors, you can go to a recent article in the Federalists where it says Illinois is taking and bringing on one of the most if you thought that New York was bad, if you thought Virginia was bad, you better go take a look at what Illinois is bringing on about abortion. You better go take a look. Hey, where's the Council of Pastors? Where are you, pastors? Why aren't they asking for you anymore? You think you have integrity. You think you have all of these things. You know what the author says in here? This is what Headley says. They're self-deluded. Self-deluded because they don't understand these fundamental truths. So, one of the other things that is said in here, it was owing to the clergy that New England was not infested with Tories like other provinces. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we have so many Tory pastors. Tory pastors. They talk about here bringing on and rousing that old Puritan blood to a pitch of excitement that would make the restraints of loyalty like the threads of gossamer. And this particular pastor was therefore for a long time previous to the incitement of the revolution by his pen in private conversations and in the pulpit gradually educated his congregation to the belief that when the colonies should rise in defense of their rights, nothing short of total separation and national independence must be looked for. Right now, we have a major battle with socialism and communism, Fabianism, neo-Marxism, And if you're not talking about this out of your pulpits, pastors, you're missing what our founders did, what our founding pastors did. You know, I bring up so many different things and I'm running out of time. So your challenge, people, today is to go back and look at all of this and always remember that the Anti-federalists, they absolutely got it right. Come on back next week.